I'm giving you a couple of lectures, a couple of talks that are going to encompass two prakim of a maimed, and then I'm going to skip over them. Why? Because I'd rather talk about the parts of the maimed that speak directly to davening, rather than the more scholarly, mystical, philosophical stuff that comes up as we journey, which is typical of a maimed. So Wednesday we had a class, yesterday we had a class, and today we're having a class. What's the topic? Yesh me'ayin. Yesh me'ayin. Yesh me'ayin is translated in the English Tanya as ex nihilo. Ex nihilo means acharei ha'heder, after nothing. After nothing. Acharei ha'heder. After darkness is like acharei ha'heder. And of course the concept is that yesh me'ayin doesn't mean creating out of nothing, because there's no such thing as nothing, not even in his head. It means creating in a way that there is a vacuum, right? That there's a quantum separation between the creator and the creation. What was the chiddush of the maimed? What was the point that the maimed was trying to make from a philosophical angle? The chiddush of the maimed is this. Once you understand that yesh me'ayin doesn't mean something from nothing, it means something from nothing, from something else, but it's quantum separated, you can have a relativity to yesh me'ayin. You can have many of them, right? From higher than Atzilus to Atzilus is yesh me'ayin. From Atzilus to Bria is another yesh me'ayin. From Bria to Yitzir is a third yesh me'ayin. From Yitzir to Asiyah is a fourth yesh me'ayin. From Asiyah to the physical Asiyah is a fifth yesh me'ayin. Why? Because each world is quantum separated from the next world. In other words, when a world ends, you don't see how it trickles into the next world. There's a chasm, so to speak, a philosophical chasm. The new world emerges in a way that you can legitimately ask the question, me'ayin, where did it come from? Because you cannot see its source. And because of the relativity of yesh me'ayin, because of the relativism of yesh me'ayin, you can have many of them. So I just want to tell you two things. I want to say two things today, and in Mitzvah Hashem tomorrow I'm going to go back to reading text, but we're going to start on page 242, which means we will have learned in 3 classes 2 pages, which is an awful lot. Okay, when you summarize and you overview, you walk on water. The Rebbe tries to illustrate yesh me'ayin by using ideas. It's a machtzedek. Tries to illustrate yesh me'ayin by using ideas. And of course, I want to make it very clear to you, you are free to interrupt me. If you don't understand, you want to ask a question, you want to disagree, please feel free to interrupt me, as I'm sure you are aware. What happens to an idea? What happens to an idea? One of two things happens to ideas. Either they go on the junk heap of nonsense, or they're carried through into an action. People get ideas all the time. Yeah? In Hasidus, we like to call them flashes of ideas. But a flash of idea. I guess in the world they would call them intuitions. Just thoughts, boom. A second before you didn't have the thought, a second after you had that thought. If everybody did what every subconscious thought brought to their consciousness, the world would be a mishagoyimers. Because 9 times out of 10, an average person, I'm not talking about great geniuses or intellectuals, 9 times out of 10, when you get a new idea, it's probably junk. So you test it. Right? A new idea enters into your mind. Next year I'm going to do this. Teenagers have 101. Next year I'm going to do this. Now, one of those is a good idea, but the other 100 are not. The way you determine if it's a good idea or it's not a good idea is that you test it. A flash, a thought enters into your mind, and when it initially enters into your mind, you think it's a great idea. Brilliant enlightenment, brilliant intuition. And you begin to test it. The testing of the intuition itself is called chokhmah. The testing of that intuition is called bina. You analyze it, you dissect it, you take it apart. What happens when you take it apart? You discover its flaws, you discover its faults, you discover its iniquities, its weaknesses, and you study it and say, is it worth it? Is it worth it? Should I tweak these problems and solve them to bring us there forward, or should I take the entire idea and dump it in the garbage heap of bad ideas? So there's it's called in Hasidus a havchana, a discernment, a testing of the initial idea that enters into your consciousness, whether you're going to carry it through or you're not going to carry it through. So 9 times out of 10, you'll study the idea and you'll say it's junk and you'll throw it in the garbage. Think of it in these terms. You have scientists and you have engineers, right? They do very, very different things. Scientists study and scientists discover, right? They create, they figure out new possibilities of how you could use physical materials and physical energy to more efficiently and more fiscally and more safely accomplish certain things. After the scientist comes up with his chidushim, the engineer engineers the machine, engineers the prototype that's going to reflect the scientist's creativity. Sometimes the engineer will design a prototype, will design a machine, he'll design a car, he'll design an airplane, he'll design a rocket, he'll design, I don't know what, a new compact disc. I mean, compact discs are already ancient history at this point. Yeah? And then the engineer's going to study it. He's going to test it, right? The way they test cars. And they give rigorous testing. And if this particular prototype fails its tests, you say, no, bad idea, throw it in the garbage and start over again. The creativity of the scientist remains there, but the applications don't necessarily apply. So very frequently, people get ideas, they think them through, and decide they're no good. Occasionally, people get good ideas, they think them through and say, this is a great idea. Now it's complicated, and it's hard, and it needs to be tweaked, right? Anybody who's ever invented anything knows that after you have the initial inspiration, and after you design the prototype, and actually you figure out what materials you need to use, and what energies you need to use, and you get the right people involved, you get the right materials, and you design the prototype, that prototype is going to be full of glitches and need to be glitched out, they need to be refined, fine-tuned, until you have a model that's efficient, and that's effective, and that's worthwhile, and then you make mass production, and then you make a lot of money. That's the principle. So you think it through. So the argument that the Rebbe says is that when you get an idea and you think it through, there's many, many steps. The first step is the idea enters into your consciousness. The second step is you studying the idea intellectually and deciding if it's good or bad. The third is you visit it emotionally. You ask yourself, do I like it or do I hate it? Is it emotionally good or is it emotionally bad? Meaning to say, even if intellectually, even if in theory, it could work, do I want to do this? Do I want to do this? And sometimes, nah, I don't want to do it, throw it away. It's a good idea, not for me. Sometimes, yeah, I like this idea, I'm going to go ahead and do it. So you go through a series of steps. You get an initial idea, you test the veracity, the viability, the practicality of that idea. Then you emotionally judge your relationship with that idea. I like it, I hate it, I could take it, I could leave it, it makes me happy, it makes me sad, it makes me angry. And then you proceed to do it. And when you do it, all kinds of problems are going to arise. Nothing in this world is ever easy. And if you're going to see it through, you're going to have to be very, very determined, and you're going to have to be very, very stubborn, and you're going to have to be very, very dedicated, right? So there's two sets of emotions. One set of emotion is, do I like it or do I not like it? That's called chagas, chesed, gevurah, tiferes. There's another set of emotions, is I'm going to see this through if I have to run through a wall. I'm going to be determined, that's netzach. I'm going to be stubborn, that's hoid. I'm going to be dedicated, that's yisoid. So there's two sets of emotions. Chesed, gevurah, tiferes says, do I like or do I not like? Netzach, hoid, yisoid means Because I like, I'm going to see this through. And then Malchus is actually doing it. You think about it, you talk about it, you do it. So there's an entire cascade. There's a whole chain of dominoes that fall. That started with the birth of an initial thought. So the Rebbe asks a simple question. Where did the thought come from? Where did the initial fantasy, which you then later analyze and process and examine emotionally and then commit yourself to and then see it through. Where did that flash come from? It came from your subconscious. It came from a part of your brain that you don't know you have. The Rebbe says that initial idea emerging from your subconscious to your consciousness is Yesh Me'ayin. All the steps after that, going from the flash of the idea to analyzing the idea, to deciding how you feel about the idea, to committing yourself to the idea, to seeing it through, it's all Yesh Me'yesh. Series of steps. Yesh Me'yesh. And the Rebbe says that's a simple mashal for Yesh Me'ayin in a narrow way. And then he says, let me give you a different example, okay? Let me give you a different, and Meli, if you're good, just give me your thumbs and I'll keep moving.
So what Yesh Me'ayin is?
The idea emerging from your subconscious to your consciousness, that moment is a mashal of Yesh Me'ayin. All the steps of development of the idea subsequent to that is a mashal for Yesh Me'yesh. You follow?
What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is the difference between Yesh Me'ayin and Yesh Me'yesh is not something from nothing versus something from something. It's whether the source of the new thing is close to the new thing or is far from the new thing. My subconscious and my consciousness are far away because I'm not aware of my subconscious. So when my subconscious gives my consciousness an idea, we say, I don't know where it came from. I know exactly where it came from. But it happens in a way, to use the term that I've been using for the last couple of classes, it's quantum removed. The subconscious of a person, the neshama of a person, and the consciousness of the person, the mind of the person, you don't see how it moves from here to here. It just jumps. So it's a mashal for Yesh Me'ayin. How the analysis of that idea takes place, and how the emotional judgment of that idea unfolds, and how the commitment to that idea is established, and how the doing of the idea is matured, is realized, you see those steps. So those are mishalim for Yesh Me'yesh, because you see the gradualism, you see the moving from point A to B, C, D, and so on and so forth. So the birth of the idea from the subconscious is a mashal for Yesh Me'ayin, and the development of that idea from a hypothetical and theoretical state to an actualized state is a mashal for Yesh Me'yesh.
So the process of it coming through your brain until you do it is Yesh Me'ayin? Is that what you said?
Is Yesh Me'yesh. Just from the subconscious to the conscious is Yesh Me'yesh.
So where is Yesh Me'ayin?
You have a neshama, right? Psychologists call your neshama your subconscious. No one's going to say that your neshama isn't there. No one is going to say your subconscious isn't there. But we will all agree that we have no idea what's going on in our subconscious, right? Right? That's why all of our psychological ills are blamed on our subconscious. When my subconscious introduces an idea to my consciousness, and in the language of Hasidus, when my neshama gives my brain a thought, you follow what I'm saying or not?
Yeah.
So there's the birth of an idea. Where did that idea come from? The idea didn't come from nowhere, it came from me. But I don't see how it came from here to here. So it's a mashal for Yesh Me'ayin. Once the idea is known by my brain, from my brain to the bottom of my feet, all of those steps, I can observe. I can see it happen. I can watch the process. I can almost predict the process. So that's called Yesh Me'yesh.
Okay.
You follow?
Yep.
Now, let's just think of this in hypothetical terms. There's a great philosopher, who comes up with very, very abstract ideas. Yeah, I'm just going to give you an example for the sake of argument, okay? I'm just giving them, and again, we're going to make believe there's no world and there's no history. Just going to give you a hypothetical example to make a point. If a philosopher comes up with the idea that in order for a civilization to exist, there have to be stable family units. Let's just say some great Aristotle, some great Chacham, looks at people, looks at societies, looks at human beings, studies the differences between human beings and animals, and he has a flash. If a civilization is going to survive, there has to be strong families. And the way I would say it to you in more practical terms is, for a great body of people to remain in cohesion, that great body must be made up of smaller and smaller units. It's not just you have 1 million people all bunched together. That million can be divided up into 10 groups of 100,000 each. And each of those 10 groups can be divided up into smaller groups of 10,000 each, until you have a family unit of 5, 6, 7 people. And the way this society develops or sustains itself, you have smaller units that join together with larger units, which join together with even larger units, until you have a great civilization. So some philosopher figures out that if people are going to live together in large numbers and close to each other, without killing each other, they can't just 1 million people agree to love each other. It's got to be smaller units joining together with larger units, and so on and so forth. Let's say some philosopher came up with this idea. However he came up, it doesn't matter. And this idea entered into his mind of this great intellectual, and he sat on the top of a hill eating beans and rice, thinking about the idea. And he thought about it from 1,000 angles. He questioned, the idea of the individual versus the group, the idea of competition versus pacifism, smaller groups, larger groups. He thought it over from 1,000 angles. And he went through the entire process of evaluating the credibility of this idea. And he decided this idea is true and it's worthwhile. So then he comes to the people of his society and he says, listen, I'm this great intellectual. I got an idea. My idea is that people have to live in stable family units. A man and a woman get married, they stay married. They have children, the children remain loyal to the parents remain loyal to the children. And he presents his philosophy. And the people say, wait a minute, we've been living our lives in a different way. And this philosopher argues with the entire civilization. He's determined to change the society, that the society should understand the value of a greater organism being made up of smaller and smaller and smaller organisms, right? In science, that's just the way it is. A human being is called a single organism. That single organism is made up of many limbs or organs. Those limbs and organs are made up of sub-limbs and organs. And it all comes down to cells and cell parts. I've talked about this many, many times. The Eibishter shows us in nature that the health of a larger group is determined by the health of the individuals within that group. If one cell is sick, it sickens all the other cells. For the unity to work, the individual has to work. And this philosopher figures this out. That if you're going to have 10 million people living in an area of, 50 square miles, they're going to be very close to each other. They can't just all love each other. There's got to be separations, smaller units and larger units. And he comes to this civilization, he argues it, and he argues it, and people tell him he's crazy, and they don't know what he's talking about, and there are different ideas, and there are new ideas, and there are old ideas, and modern ideas, and postmodern ideas, whatever it is. And he perseveres. He convinces the civilization that he's right. He convinces the entire civilization that philosophically, that intellectually, for a large group of people to stay together and to live peaceably, not to eat each other up alive, they can't just be a happy family of 1 million people. They have to be small family units and larger family groups and larger clans and larger tribes, and then they become a nation. Let's say he convinces people of that. Yeah? What happens next? This city in addition to having philosophers, has governors, has leaders. They're not so smart, but they're much, much more practical. And these governors come along and say, wait, if this philosopher is right, for the sake of argument, if this philosopher is right, that we need, for the sake of our civilization, to emphasize stable family units, that means that we can't just be one big family of 1 million people. We have to be smaller groups that join together into larger groups and that are all relatively stable. We're going to need laws that are going to govern this. We need laws to govern this. And they come up with the law of marriage, for example. And the laws of ksuba, obligations of a man to his wife, and in a different way, the obligations of a wife to her husband. They come up with laws to protect the family. They come up with laws to encourage people to have children. They come up with laws to make it difficult for family units to break apart, and so on and so forth. So what happens now? The philosopher finished his work, and then the governors come along, then the civil leaders come along, and they create civil law. So what do you think is going to happen? There's going to be a whole new round of fighting amongst the civilization. I don't like this law is too strict, and this law is too lenient, and this law favors this one, this law doesn't favor the other one. And they're going to argue and argue and argue and argue until they're going to come up with laws that are going to govern the civilization. There's a law of a marriage. There's a law of the stability of a family. Right? They're going to give tax breaks to people who get married, tax breaks to people who have children. There's an obligation that parents look after their children. But just like parents have an obligation to look after their children, parents have a right to raise their children however they wish, and the government outside cannot come in and say, we don't think you're doing proper child rearing, right? So there's a whole second set of ideas that are born from the first set of ideas. And just like the first set of ideas, after this great thinker thought them through, and he came up with the ideas, he had to argue it out with the people until they convinced him. When the governors come along and they create a series of laws to preserve the ideas that their great chocham, that their great philosopher introduced to them, they go through the same process all over again. They come up with ideas, come up with laws, and they sit and think about them. Are they good laws or are they bad laws? Do they make sense or do that make sense? Are they realistic or they're not realistic? Some of their laws they throw in the garbage. Some of their laws they change, they develop. Then they come to the people and present them, listen, if we're going to live according to the ideas of this great Chacham, here are the laws of our civilization. The people go crazy, and they argue and argue and argue and argue till they come up with a system of jurisprudence. And finally, they make a legal code that's going to preserve this civilization by creating laws that protect and honor and preserve the family unit based on ideas of the big Chacham. So I want you to think about what I'm trying to illustrate. What I'm trying to illustrate is that this philosopher had a flash, had an idea. That flash of an idea is a mashal for Yesh Me'ayin. Then he developed that idea. He developed it in his own mind. He bounced it around in his own head. He analyzed it. He questioned it. He doubted it. Yeah. He presented it to the people. The people argued with him. They pushed back, and he convinced them. Done. All the people agree in theory that for a large group of people to live together successfully, they have to be made up of smaller and smaller secure, smaller, not fluid, smaller units. What happened next? The politicians, the governors, had another flash. We need laws. If this is going to work, we're going to need laws. So what am I trying to demonstrate, Melly? We have a second Yesh Me'ayin. You have the Yesh Me'ayin of the philosopher. The Yesh Me'ayin of the philosopher, right? The Yesh Me'ayin of the philosopher, who thought of the concept that in order for a large group of people to live together civilly, that's made up of smaller and smaller units. Then you have the Yesh Me'ayin of the politician, of the governors, who came up with the idea that you need laws. Nothing is going to work without rules, without laws. They have to be enforced. So you have a Yesh Me'ayin on top of a Yesh Me'ayin. A new idea is born. That new idea is developed. That new idea is completed. It's consolidated. From that new idea is born another new idea on a lower level. To use Kabbalistic language, in the next world. We're not dealing anymore with the theory of family units, we're dealing with the laws of family units. So those governors have a eureka. Wait a minute, if this is going to work, we need laws. Laws to encourage marriage, laws to sustain marriage, laws to empower parents, laws to obligate parents, on and on and on and on and on. Those ideas are also born. Yesh me'ayin, they come from the subconscious of this governor to the consciousness of this here governor, and he thinks it through. He says, listen, here are the rules, the people fight about it, and it takes months and years, and they finally agree to the laws. So what I'm trying to demonstrate to you is what we're calling the relativism of Yesh me'ayin. You can have Yesh me'ayin and another Yesh me'ayin. Atzilus is born Yesh me'ayin from Ein Sof. Why? Because the idea that emerged, so to speak, in the consciousness of Atzilus, that our Maimon calls Chochmah, happens from Ein Sof in a quantum-separated way. You don't see the steps. Then Atzilus develops point by point, step by step. That process you can see. That's called Yesh me'yesh. Then you get to the end of Atzilus. And another thing is born. The Chochmah of Bria is born. It's an idea on a lower level. It's not a theoretical idea. It is a practice, a legal idea. And when that idea is born, the initial birth of those laws is again a Yesh me'ayin. Now, the development of those ideas, as you go, through studying and challenging and creating protections and creating safeguards, is a whole process, but that's all Yesh me'yesh. You follow? You understand?
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to illustrate is you can have Yesh me'ayins stacked on top of one another. Now let's take it to the next level. The politicians, the governors, politicians is a bad word. The governors of the civilization say you have to have laws. Correct? And they present to society with a whole system of laws. And they complete it, they argue about it, it takes months and takes years. I mean, just think about how the American Constitution and the American Bill of Rights was negotiated. It was war amongst the big states and the little states and the delegates, right? They worked it out until they were able to come to an agreement about how they should create the government of the United States of America, which is one of the most amazing stories in the history of mankind. The birth and the development of the order that we have in the United States of America. Now, wait, listen. So the governors come along with a set of laws. They come to the people scream back, they argue back and forth, they come up with a system. But then you have a third set of leaders. They're called the militia, they're called the police. They have to enforce the law. And they come back to the governors with a simple question. What do you do with somebody who breaks the law? Who doesn't keep the law? He violates the sanctity of a marriage, doesn't support it, or whatever the case is. What do you do with him? So these policemen say, we got to punish him. How are we going to punish him? We're going to cut off his arm. And you have the same process a third time. That if somebody breaks the law, there has to be a consequence, because there's no consequence. If the law doesn't have any authority, the law doesn't have any power, people are not going to keep it. Okay? And it's a third model. Some guy, his job, he's a policeman. He's not a philosopher. He's not a legal mind. He's not a governor. He's not a organizer mind. But he's a reactionary. He sees when people break the law and he says we have to make sure the law is not broken. Same thing happens. He comes up with an idea. Someone commits a crime, there should be a consequence. People say, wait a minute, don't punish so fast. Don't punish too extremely, give people second chances. And that whole process repeats itself a third time. So, again, you have a Yesh me'ayin moment. The Yesh me'ayin moment is when one guy figured out what happens if one guy doesn't follow the laws that we establish, how he should be punished, or whether he should be punished, and how there should be a prosecution, and who should do the prosecuting, and how the trial should take place, and on and on and on and on and on and on. So the point of everything I've just demonstrated is the idea that you can have one Yesh me'ayin on top of another Yesh me'ayin on top of another Yesh me'ayin. Yesh me'ayin simply means a new world. That new world came from an old world, but you don't see the connection. The philosopher's subconscious, his consciousness, is Yesh me'ayin. The philosopher's plan to the governor's conscious thought of laws is Yesh me'ayin. The development of those laws is Yesh me'ayin. The governor's concluding how the laws are going to be in that society, leaping to the policemen, to the militias, enforcing of those laws is yesh me'ayin. The process of developing those laws is yesh me'yesh. And you can repeat this idea again and again and again. You can go lower and lower and lower until the guy who's cleaning the bathrooms in the prisons, or the guy who's providing the therapy for people who need to be encouraged to persevere, to deal with hardships, and so on and so forth. So there's a series of worlds that are stacked one on top of the other. Each world is separated from the next world by an ayin, by a step where you don't see the gradualism. It's like something ended, something else is birthed, something else is born, and it's quantum separated. And then every world develops. That's yesh me'yesh. So the Tzemach Tzedek asserts that there are many, many worlds, and every world compared to the next world below it and above it is ayin separated from yesh. And each time you go from a higher world to a lower world, the higher world is ayin, the lower world is yesh. Okay, and they're stacked one on top of the other, from Ein Sof to Atzilus, Tzilas, to Bria, etc., etc., etc. Questions or comments? Okay, perfect. Now, the Tzemach Tzedek says that this model of repeatedly stacked yesh me'yayin, yesh me'yesh events are called memale kalam. Memale kalam means as it comes into the worlds. Each world has its own rules, each world has its own capability, each world has its own light and life and energy, and therefore each world has its own yesh me'yayin and its own yesh me'yesh. So there's a lot of yesh me'yayin events. There's many, many, many yesh me'yayin events in what we call hishtalshalos, in the chain of worlds, yeah? But then the Tzemach Tzedek says something else. There's a Seviv Kalam in yesh me'yayin event. Seviv means that it surrounds. Hashem made all of this. Hashem made all of this. Hashem made the philosopher's world, and He made the governor's world, and He made the militias, the policeman's world, and He created the warden's world, and He created all of these different worlds. He made them all. And although within the scheme of worlds, there's steps, there's one yesh me'yayin and another yesh me'yayin and another yesh, to the Eibishter who created it all, this entire reality, from the philosopher till the guy who takes out the garbage, is one big reality. And they're birthed in a single point. In other words, above the idea that there are many different yesh me'yayins, there is an idea that there's one yesh me'yayin that's responsible for all the yesh me'yayins within the system. And that is Hashem decided to create a world. Now every world is made up of many smaller worlds. Even a human being, you, I, yeah? We're one single organism, but then we also have a brain, we have a heart, we have lungs, we have a liver, we have kidneys. Each one of those organs is an entity unto itself. And each one of those organs has within itself a managing system. Even in a cell, in a single cell, there's different parts, right? There's the part of the cell which acts as the battery that produces energy. It's called the mitochondria. And then there's parts of the cell which take in food. There's part of the cell that repair the cell and that they strengthen the cell and they reinforce the cell. And then there's parts of the cell that throw out the garbage. So within a single cell, you got a whole system. So there's stacks and stacks. There's layers and layers and layers of yesh me'yayin, yesh me'yesh, yesh me'yayin, yesh me'yesh, over and over again. And then at the end of it all, we're one human being, we're one person. Similarly, when you talk about creation, and you stack the yesh me'yayins, one yesh me'yayin, another yesh me'yayin, another yesh me'yayin, a world, says the Tzemach Tzedek, all of that is called memale kalam. The yesh me'yayin events on the level of memale kalam, which means that every world is different. But there's a different yesh me'yayin event, says the Tzemach Tzedek. And the different yesh me'yayin event is, first there was God, and now God created a world. Simple. The fact that the world that the Eibishter created is so complicated that it's going to have numerous yesh me'yayin events to the Eibishter, to the initiator of this entire system. It's one yesh me'yayin event. First there isn't a world, and then there is a world. And the Tzemach Tzedek makes an assertion, makes an argument. It's a philosophical argument. And he bases it on the theory of infinity. And the argument is that when you look at the whole creation through the eyes of the Sovev Kalam and Yesh B'ayin event, rather than the numerous Memala Kalam and Yesh B'ayin events, so when you look at the creation through the eyes of the real creator, of the Sovev Kalam Yesh B'ayin event, there is no higher and lower in the creation. It's one big creation. You wouldn't say that Hashem is closer to a higher world and he's farther from a lower world. You would say that the distance between Hashem and the highest world and the distance between Hashem and the lowest world is equal. What is the distance? Infinity. And there's no infinity plus one, there's no infinity minus one. The definition of infinity is that it's beyond number. So the Sovev Kalam Yesh B'ayin event is one, and the distance between the Ayin, which is Hashem, and the Yesh, which is the creation, on the level of the Sovev Kalam and Yesh B'ayin event is that he's equally removed or equally intimate, equally far away, equally close to the highest point and the lowest point in the entire system. Even though within that system there are so many different levels. So Tzemach says, I want you to understand Yesh B'ayin in two models. I want you to understand the idea that there's a world and another world and another world and another world. And you have repeated, you have many Yesh B'ayin events. Every time a new world is created, it's a new Yesh. Think of it in generations. Children are born, that's Yesh B'ayin. Those children have children, it's another Yesh B'ayin. And then there's the creation of everything. And the Tzemach Tzedek says, understand that although when you compare a world to a world, you would say this is higher and this is lower. This Yesh B'ayin event is more important. This Yesh B'ayin event is less important. And this Yesh B'ayin event is less important. Still, that's only within the scheme of the individual worlds. But when you appreciate that there's another concept in Yesh B'ayin, that Hashem made everything, as far as that Yesh B'ayin event is concerned, everything is the same. Do you understand? Okay. Now, point, tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem, we're going to start reading someplace on page 242. I'm not sure exactly where. I need to think it through to decide where I'm going to begin. I'm going to begin someplace in the middle of Perek Yud Gimel. The point is, when we're saying Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, we're relating to the Eibishter as he's the creator of the Sovev Kalam and Yesh B'ayin event. When we're saying Shmoneh Esrei, and you have 19 brachas, and each bracha has a different meditation, and a different nikud, and a different midah, and a different sfira, we're talking to the individual Yesh B'ayin events. When a Yid says Shema, he's talking to the Hashem, in relationship with whom there's only one Yesh B'ayin. When we're davening Shmoneh Esrei, we're talking to Hashem as he comes into the creation, that every bracha is a different Yesh B'ayin. You understand? You understand?
Yeah.
Good. That's it. We're done. A class. So tomorrow, like I said, I'm going to start to read again inside. I'll figure out exactly where. And what we did was we jumped over the philosophy and we're going to stick to Krishma Tefillah, which I think is what we want to learn. We want to learn about davening and about Shema as much as we can. Okay? And as always, I thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Can I tell you something? I saw an interview with Rabbi Adin Even Yisrael, Steinsaltz. You know who that man is?
Yeah, he's the one that does Quran, Talmud.
Right, he did many things. He's a brilliant man. He's a genius. He's a real genius. He's a very accomplished.
He made a whole Gemara by himself.
He made a whole Gemara. He made many things. This man spoke at a JLI conference, and he said, "You, meaning Americans, hate intellectuals. You meet a person who actually uses his brain, and you're out of it, dump him in the heap." So intellectuals in America are lonely. You're obviously an intellectual. So I'm happy to have somebody to talk to. And value the mind that God gave you. use it, develop it, and in the end, the joke will be on everybody else. Even if it's not considered cool when you're 18 to be smart and like ideas, when you're 35, it's very cool. And when you're 50, it's even cooler. Trust me. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll see you tomorrow. Good morning.